Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah. So today, what I'd like to do is to kind of double click on the Lincoln chapter, which talks about his descent into a severe depression, and how there were a number of factors that contributed to that. And then what I want to do is look at two different models from our sources for how to respond to failure, frustration, and challenges. And then look at a couple of passages from our Siddur about how we can pick the better path for us. So those are our tasks today. We're going to look at Lincoln in depression and Lincoln as he comes out of depression. Then we're going to look at the Torah that offers us two very different models. And then we're going to look at our Siddur for guidance about how we can pick the path that is better for us, the path that we would like to pick. Okay? So we're talking about Lincoln. And let me just open it up. This is chapter 5 that begins with his quote, "I must die or be better." And it talks about his descent into depression that was so severe. You know, his friends took sharp objects out of his house. They worried that he would kill himself. His depression was so severe that he said, if you took all the misery I feel and you spread it out on every human being on the planet, there's so much misery in me that there would not be one happy person on planet Earth. That deep a depression. And what causes that, and how does he emerge from that? So let's first look at Lincoln, and then we'll look at the Torah and the Siddur. So what were your thoughts about this very evocative chapter, Abraham Lincoln in the midst of a severe depression? Thoughts, comments, questions? So let's talk about why he's in depression. Right. I think as Doris Kearns Goodwin tells the story, 4 things kind of converge on Lincoln at the same time. One is, turns out that he concludes that the promises he made to get elected to the Illinois state legislature were promises he could not fulfill. He had been elected on a platform of public works and of infrastructure. Vote me in and I'm going to bring you railroads and canals and roads and bridges. And he started those. And then apparently there was a severe recession in 1840. And all of those projects had to stop in the middle of their construction. A lot of loss of jobs. Illinois' credit rating was devastated. And since Lincoln was identified as the leader of these public work projects, he took this personally, a moral failing, I didn't deliver. And so he announces he's not going to continue in the legislature. Then there's also the problem of his law practice, which was struggling. He couldn't make any money. He was dirt poor. Then there was the problem that because he was dirt poor, he felt like he couldn't support Mary Todd and a growing family. So he canceled his engagement with Mary Todd. And then it seems like, but there's a reading of Abraham Lincoln that he was actually gay before it was okay to be gay. He has this friend named Joshua Speed that he says, he loved more than anyone in the world. He and Joshua Speed would share a bed. I loved him more than anyone. This is in her chapter. And then Joshua Speed has to leave Illinois, leave Springfield, and go back to Kentucky. And so Lincoln literally loses his best friend. And as a result of all of that, he is just in this dark place. So take a look on page 100. And let's just get a sense of this very thick depression. I'm reading in the middle of page 100. I am now the most miserable man living, Lincoln wrote his then law partner. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on the earth. Whether I shall ever be better, I cannot tell. I awfully forebode I shall not. To remain as I am is impossible. I must die or be better, it appears to me. And then day after day, he remained bedridden, unable to sleep, eat, or sleep, unfit to carry out his duties in the legislature. Lincoln went crazy, Speed said. It was terrible. He's reduced and emaciated in appearance, seems scarcely to possess the strength enough to speak above a whisper. His case at present is truly deplorable. And the doctors in Springfield believe Lincoln was within an inch of being a perfect lunatic for life. So that's Abraham Lincoln, who in the end, of course, would go on to preserve our Union. So here's my question. Before we get to the Torah and before we get to the Siddur, just based on the story that Doris Kearns Goodwin tells, how does he go from that deep, dark place to be able to save our Union? What does he do? And what does he do? And what is it that he does that we can learn from? Would love your voices here. Bruce.
He becomes a scholar of history to understand slavery.
Yeah, he just digs in. He just digs in. He studies the constitutional history. He studies the Missouri Compromise. And as she tells the story, nobody in the United States became a greater scholar of the issue of slavery than Lincoln. And when it came time to debate Stephen Douglas, he just knew what he was talking about. So that's one thing. So he studies. What else does he do? So he does a self-improvement project on learning about slavery. What else? What other kind of self-improvement project does he do? What else? Where else does he try? John, what else does he try to do?
He works to become a better lawyer. It's unclear how he, to me, how he came out of that major depressive episode. Maybe just, they normally last about 6 months. You don't do anything. But he also said he hadn't fulfilled things he felt he really needed to do, be worthy. And therefore he started to work at it. It's his work ethic and his learning that really made the difference after that and subsequently when he gets down again.
Yeah, he says, I am not an accomplished lawyer. She quotes him as saying that I'm not an accomplished lawyer. And so he just works on becoming a better lawyer. And this is the part of the story that, you know, we're told about when we're kids, that Lincoln would read with the light of a candle at night. And that he spent a lot of time working and studying. How do I become a better lawyer? And according to this account, he becomes one of the best trial lawyers in Central Illinois. He has one of the most busy practices in Central Illinois. He becomes a scholar of slavery. And not only that, so in other words, it's like an energy shift. Instead of an energy that takes him down, he takes this energy to work and scholarship, and not only in slavery and law, but he studies astronomy and he studies mathematics, and he just tries to become kind of a Renaissance man. And what Doris Kearns Goodwin generalizes from this is that, and it's true for Lincoln, and she says it's true for the other three as well. The key ingredient for the successful leader is somebody who can look in the mirror and say, I was wrong. I admit my shortcomings, and I am going to grow from my shortcomings. That's as Doris Kearns Goodwin postures it, right? That each of these four people, and Lincoln in particular today, looks in the mirror and says, Lord, I'm not a very good lawyer. Lord, I was not a very good legislator. My only term in Congress was a failure. I need to do better. I need to be better. I need to work harder. And when Lincoln is asked, you know, how did you go from a mediocre lawyer to the best lawyer? He says, work, 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 work. And so it's an attitudinal shift, which is about self-reflection, self-criticism, and self-accountability. And that is, as she portrays it, how Lincoln pulled himself out. Now, I don't know, John, you're a psychiatrist. I'm a rabbi. Everyone does something. And Doris Kearns Goodwin is not a psychiatrist. She is a historian. Does that reading of Lincoln feel right to your psychiatric ears?
Yes, although, again, having read it several times, I don't understand how he came out of that first episode. But when he came out, then he looked at himself and said, I have more things to do. If I work at it, I can do it. He eventually restarts his relationship, even though it's not perfect. And he uses, as you said, he uses that energy to move forward and to become a better person in his own eyes, which is what's most important.
Right. So before we, so that's Lincoln. I look in the mirror and I say, I was wrong. I could do better. That's Doris Kearns Goodwin on Lincoln. And in a minute, we're going to pivot to Jewish sources on this issue. But first, let me get some comments. Judy Swartz, good to see you. Judy, you're muted, my friend.
I think we can't underestimate. Doris Kearns Goodwin says in Stephen Logan, he found a mentor, a loving, almost father-like person. And I think quietly that played tremendously in boosting his confidence. And then he had the abilities and he had the right person to nurture them. All right. And I think that played a major role and pulled him into being, and gave him the strength that he can now endure the future losses in the Senate or what have you, because it wasn't just anybody who mentored him.
Great. Right. The importance of a really wonderful mentor. Dottie. And if you'll unmute Dottie, please. Dottie, dear, you're still muted. If you can please unmute. We can't hear you, Dottie. You're muted. If you can unmute. Thank you.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're perfect.
The thing about Abraham Lincoln, basically is a lot of brilliant people. He's the perfectionist, and his first time as assembly, one of the things in the assembly, whatever they called it, the fact that he couldn't get done the roads, the bridges, or whatever that he had promised the constituents that he would do. I think this is what partially destroyed him until he came to. The point is, he wanted to make a mark on history, regardless of whether it be assemblyman, senator. And I think that this is what ate him alive until he came, his friends, anybody that knew him loved him. But I think that this was basically one of the problems in his personality or his makeup. If it isn't perfect, it didn't satisfy him. And that's the feeling that I got. Everything was only half done. They had that problem, whatever the year was, and that's when he broke down.
Right.
And I think because
right, he did have that perfectionist kind of tendency. One other thing about him that makes us feel like such a different century, like such a different world, was that he took his word very seriously. Yeah. And he took the notion of truth very seriously. And he took the notion that I am accountable for what I say very seriously. So when he said, if you elect me, I will bring you bridges and roads and canals and a railroad, and they did, and then he couldn't because of the recession, he took that failure seriously, right? The notion that my words have responsibility and accountability, that just feels like it's from a different century, but that was also in there. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to kind of pivot from the Lincoln story of somebody who was in a dark place, and I want to ask, what does our tradition have to say to us? We're not Abraham Lincoln.
We'll see you then.
What does our tradition have to say to us when we are in a very dark place? And as it turns out, last week's reading is about as dark a place as it gets, because according to the testimony of the reading itself, the entire world was destroyed. and all life on planet Earth had vanished. This was, a holocaust for the world. All people were dead. All animals were dead. All fish were dead. All birds were dead. All life was dead, right? Desolate, okay? And then it turns out that we're going to have two very different moves in response to the utter desolation of after the flood. So let's take a look on page 1. And what you have here first is God's move, okay? The Lord, this is after everyone comes out of the ark and all the animals come out of the ark. Noah built an altar, offers a sacrifice. The Lord smelled the pleasing odor. The Lord said to himself, never again will I doom the earth because of man, since the devisings of man's mind are evil from his youth, nor will I ever destroy every living being as I have done. Okay, what would you say is God's first move here? It's going to go on, but before God goes on, how would you characterize, what vocabulary would you use? What language would you use to describe God's response to the desolation of the flood? John, and then Linda.
Self-reflection, looking at his self-reflection, looking at what he has done, rethinking it, perhaps knowing it was in error, even though he's God. So no one is above looking at themselves, saying that man is not perfect. I know that, and I can figure out how to deal with it without destroying everything.
Yes, I mean, this is the original self-reflection. And as you say, John, it's God doing it. God saying, you know what, I messed this up. Because the truth is, human being, you know what, I was ticked off at human nature, so I killed everybody. But you know what, that doesn't change human nature. And human nature is what it is, and I can't go around destroying the world every generation. I'm not going to do this again. This is an example of God looking in the mirror, so to speak, and saying, I was wrong. Linda. Linda, did you, you're mute. I can't hear you. Now you're muted again. If you couldn't unmute and speak louder, we can't hear you quite yet. Okay, now try again. Are you speaking? For some reason, we're not able to hear you, Linda. Sorry. If you send me a chat, I will read what you have to say. Okay? Well, but in the meantime, while Linda sends me a chat, anyone else want to just comment on God's move? Even God saying, I was wrong. Any other voices on that? Let's take a look at what happens next with God before we get to Noah. So now look on page 2, okay? So God says, God really gets that, wow, I messed this up. Page 2 of the handout, verse 11, I will maintain my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by waters of a flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God further said, this is the sign that
How's this?
I'm sorry? Yeah, Linda, I think I'll be able to get you.
Am I unmuted now?
Now you're unmuted, yeah. So let me
Okay,
just
no
finish
problem.
this
I
and then I'll call you.
switched to a different. Okay.
Great, perfect. I'll call you in 1 second. So God further said, this is the sign that I set for the covenant between me and you, every living creature with you for all ages to come. I've set my bow in the clouds, and it will serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Right, and the bow is in the clouds. I will remember it. I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures, all flesh that is on the earth. Right, so what this adds just is God realizes I made a mistake. And now God does, kind of like you have a wedding ring that reminds you, oh yeah, I made that big commitment and I'm going to hold myself to that commitment. The rainbow is God's wedding ring with humanity. You know what? I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to destroy the world. This is going to be an eternal covenant. And so I am going to learn from my mistake. And I will be reminded next time I'm tempted, to go and lose my temper and kill everybody, I'll see the rainbow and I'll remember I'm not going to do that again. Okay? Linda Leffert.
I have a question about the statement that says, after never again will I doom the earth because of man, quote, since the devisings of man's mind are evil from his youth, nor will I ever again destroy. So he's the assumption. I read a little more later and it says like, okay, when you're a kid, you don't call it evil. You just call it behaving or misbehaving. But once you get to be a youth, but this seems to me, unless I'm misunderstanding it, that the position is taken that man starts with being evil from his youth, and then I presume has a chance to make things better, as opposed to what I would have thought was you start out with a clean slate and which you can go either way. So I just have a question about what that means.
Yeah, so the Hebrew is ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra min urav, that he's saying that human nature, human nature just has a dark side. And if you think about it, Linda and everybody, all of the characters in the first 11 chapters, we'll get to Abraham later, but all of them are given, all of them are given choices, and based on human nature, they all make bad choices and they screw up their world. So Adam and Eve, are in the Garden of Eden, and they are tempted by the forbidden fruit, and they take the forbidden fruit knowing that it's wrong, and they're expelled from the Garden of Eden. Cain is mad at Abel. Cain kills Abel. He's exiled, Navanad Ba'aretz. He should wander in the world. And Noah, we'll see in a minute, but Noah gets drunk and does something untoward and something sexual and something gross and something demeaning, and he's never the same. And I think what this is speaking to is God saying, human beings have a capacity for self-destruction. And what's amazing is how current this is, and you read it all the time. And it's amazing is that even human beings who are genius and brilliant and amazing do the stupidest things. I mean, without getting into gross detail, I'm shocked because I knew this guy from college. He was in my class in college, Jeffrey Toobin. Genius. He's such a writer, and he's 9 books. I knew him from college. My age, accomplished, a CNN pontificator, right? Genius, writer, brilliant, and he does what he did. And he's just never going to be the same, never going to be the same. And there is something about, there is just something about humans that we lose self-control and we do stupid things. And I think that's what this, Linda, does not also point the other side, which is humans also have a Yetzer HaTov and a beautiful side and a creative side and a decent side and an honest side and a healing side. So I think this is a particularly dark rendering, but what God is saying is humans from the time of Cain and Abel to the time of Jeffrey Toobin will do stupid things, will lose self-control.
Not all of them. This
Not
seems
all
to
of
me
them,
to say
right.
that everyone starts with, when you're a youth and can know better, starts with an evil mind.
Right, but we have
And
that
I think
capacity.
that maybe it's the translation, I don't know, but
Right. Yes, I think that is the fair translation. In other words, this is not a full statement of humanity, but it is a partial true statement. It's true so far as it goes, that all of us have the capacity for really dumb stuff. All of us have the capacity for really dumb stuff, both for cruel and unethical and also self-destructive. And that's built into human nature. Which is actually a good pivot point for next. Let's take a look at page 3, and then we're going to talk about how Judaism equips us to deal with this, right? But look on page 3 and 4. Noah, the tiller of soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent, etc. And then Rabbi Kushner points out, overwhelmed by the task of rebuilding a destroyed world, finding himself virtually alone and friendless in a nearby empty world, or perhaps burdened by a sense of guilt at having survived when so many others perished, Noah turns to drink. And then whatever it is that he does, it's not good. An act associated with shame and loss of dignity. So you have here in the end of the reading last week, you have two very different models of how to respond to frustration and failure and darkness. You have God saying, you know what, I'm not going to do this again, I'm going to learn. And you have Noah who turns to drink, does something inappropriate, and screws up his life, right? Right? So those are the models, either self-reflection and self-betterment, or kind of surrendering to the despair, which is what Noah does at the end of the reading, right? And the question I want to ask you is, and before we get, I want some comments first, but how does Judaism equip us to make healthy choices and good choices when we're at a crossroads like that? We could take the God path of self-reflection and self-betterment. We could take the Noah path of drink. By the way, you know, Shira and I are always in the market for a great Netflix movie to watch. There's a fabulous show that we've been watching called Queen's Gambit. It's a Netflix, Queen's Gambit. It's about this girl who grows up in an orphanage. Her parents die. She's a chess genius. And what's so painful about this show is she is addicted to drugs and alcohol. And her stepmother is addicted to alcohol. And you just see, again, this capacity. She's a genius chess player, but she has resilience, but she also has this capacity for self-destruction built into her soul. That's Queen's Gambit. It's very compelling. And the question is, how does Judaism equip us to make a good choice? So before I get to the Siddur, let me just invite any thoughts, comments, questions about the two models at the end of last week's Torah reading. And I'm going to make sure that I get the other panel as well, so that anybody who wants to speak would love to hear your thoughts. David Kopelman.
Well, we have to put aside some vanity and realize that human beings are animals, and that we have, I'm told, 97% of the DNA of a chimpanzee. So there's maybe 3 or 4% difference, which is probably our intelligence. So animals have an instinct of greed, avarice, killing if they're necessary, selfishness. It's only human beings that can rise above it. So we have that animal component, and it's a fact of life. And how we deal with it is another story, but it's there, and we can't deny it.
It's definitely there. When you think about how many people are in an accomplished spot in life, and they give it all up for nothing, for some stupid choice because of our complicated human nature, it's truly astounding. It's just truly astounding. And so the question that behooves all of us to think about is, how do we control ourselves? How do we control ourselves? So, because when, as Andy Stanley puts it, when you lose self-control, you lose control. And what is it that Judaism does to equip us? So let me take a look. I want to turn to the Siddur. Prayer is just so important and so hard. There's almost nothing that is in such an extreme amount of both. It's so important. It's so helpful. It's so crucial. It's so critical to the development of your best self. And prayer is really hard. It's so easy to do prayer and never be affected by prayer. It's so easy to do prayer and miss the point of prayer. It's so easy to do prayer and it never actually reaches you, where it could actually change your life. So I want to talk about prayer. And what I'm going to do is show you two passages from the Daily Prayer Book that I think speak to our issue. How do we choose wisely the path of self-reflection instead of self-destruction, right? That's our question. Self-reflection self-destruction. How does prayer equip us to choose self-reflection instead of self-destruction? So so this is something that we say every morning. I'm going to do it in Hebrew and then in English. And here's my question. If you were to actually carve out a life where you did this regularly, where you were open to this, what impact would it have on you? Can you go with me for that? Can you go with that question? If you were to carve out a life, right now I realize that probably nobody on this call, engages in prayers like this, but I want to just go with this hypothetical. Imagine you created a world where you regularly encounter these words in the way that they want to be encountered. And my question would be, what impact would that have? So here's the Hebrew. We ask this every morning. Ma anachnu mechayenu mechastenu, ma tzidkenu, ma yishenu, ma kochenu, ma gvurotenu, ma nomar lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu. What are we? What is our life? What is our piety? What's our goodness? What's our righteousness? What's our attainment? Our power, our might? What can we say, Adonai, our God and the God of our ancestors, right? So this is a prayer where we, Doris Kearns Goodwin uses this analogy that we often use, that Lincoln looks at himself in the mirror and says, I am wanting. This is a daily mirror. Every morning, we look at ourselves in the mirror and say, what is my life amounting to? What is my life amounting to? Now, here's my question. Would this be a good thing to do? And would this, if you did this, would this help you pick self-betterment and self-reflection over self-destruction or not? And what gets in the way of our doing this? Love your voices. Who has a prayer life here on the screen, on this call, where, there's so many reasons to pray. You pray, especially pre-pandemic, you pray for people, you pray, Garfinkel goes to talk to God, Cohen goes to talk to Garfinkel, you go for your friends, you go for the tuna fish, you go for the kiddush, you go to get out of the house, you go to have a self-rezone. There's a lot of good reasons to pray that don't involve this level of introspection. But does anyone here pray in order to have this level of introspection? Anyone? Fran. And I can't hear you, Fran. We're having a technically challenged day today. For some reason, if you want to send me an email on the chat, then I can read what you have to say. Let me just invite anyone else who would like to share on this. Do you experience prayer in this way as a mirror? Anybody? David. And if you can unmute, please, David. And thank you for raising your hand.
I suspect, but it's only a suspicion, that most people pray not to self-improve or for introspection, but for help from God. Like, please don't let me get sick, or if I'm sick, please let me get better. The old story that there's no foxhole atheists, that when you're in danger, you reach out and say, please, you look for some divine intervention. Don't let me or a friend of mine live. Don't let them die. Let them get healthy again. That seems to be a common thread of at least speaking for myself. Rather than introspection, you're looking for outside help and intervention.
Yeah, so I agree with you 100%, David, that is probably the primary way that most people relate to prayer, which is, God, help me or my loved one not get sick, or help me or my loved one have the biopsy be good, or help me or my loved one recover from this procedure, this surgery. And I think that's right and that's valid, right? And that there's no atheist in a foxhole. I think that's right and that's valid. And the question, though, is when you're not in extremis, when you're not in the middle of a medical situation or of a crisis, right? If it's just it's an ordinary Tuesday. It's Tuesday, October 27th. Hopefully you don't have a medical crisis going on. Can you relate to prayer, not as the atheist and the non-atheist in the foxhole? Can you relate to prayer as the mirror? That's the question. And let me frame the question differently. If you did, what impact would that have on your life? Other thoughts and questions? Leslie Zeisis and then John.
This brings me immediately to your sermon a while ago on praying to God. But I think like everything else that's new, yes, what David said initially, that's what we all hope for, but I think all this time that we have been secluded from the world and from running out and getting that tuna fish sandwich and all the things that you said, I think that there are people who, when they see things going on in the news or on television or with whatever they see out the window, they have had this time, and it just is something like osmosis that comes into them for self-reflection. I think when people see things that they don't approve of, that gives them the impetus to improve themselves. And I think improving themselves, they might not say, oh, I'm praying, but I think indirectly that could be prayer. But I think everyone should go back and listen to your sermon last year. That was a good one.
Thank you, Leslie. John.
I'm going to jump ahead one page to the parts from the Shemona Esrei.
Please.
I've always really liked the first verse on that page around people being privileged to have been given by God knowledge, wisdom, and discernment. And that always tells me we should use them. And the next one say, we are not perfect, but God is forgiving. We can return. So that I've always cherished those particular verses as to look at myself and say, am I using my wisdom, knowledge, discernment? I don't have to be perfect anymore. I mean, so I've always really liked those verses.
John, thank you. Let's just turn to that for a quick second, because I think the flow that you articulated is so powerful, right? This is from the Amidah, the daily Amidah. We say it 3 times a day. And the first paragraph, as you say, is about intelligence. Praise you, Adonai, who graciously grants us intelligence, discernment, right? We can use our mind to think. And then the next one is, Lord, as I'm thinking about my life, I realize the ways in which I'm not living the life I want to live. I realize the ways in which I'm not perfect. I realize the ways in which I need to do better. I need to return to a better version of me. And then the third one is exactly, God, thank you for being you, because you forgive. You're invested in my becoming a better me. You're going to forgive me for the worst parts of me, and you're going to nurture and support me in the better parts of me. Now, that's exactly the flow that John articulated is in the Amidah. And so here's my question for you guys, and you're the only ones who can answer this question. The words are perfect. The words are beautiful. The ideas are holy. The question is, does it land in you? Does it land for you? Do you have the kind of prayer life where you actually can think about this and say, you know what, I'm at a crossroads. I could surrender to depression. I could surrender to alcohol. I could surrender to all kinds of bad choices, or I could use my intelligence to make better choices and to live a better life. That's the question. And because we all have a choice, it would be good to have something that you can do every day that will nurture your better choices. So how does this actually connect with your life? Would love to hear voices on how it connects with your lived life. And maybe to see if anyone else is raising your hand on the second screen. Penny, thank you.
You know what, there are times that it resonates for me. There are times that I slow down enough to think about it and absorb it, but on a daily basis, we're rushing around, have to get to a meeting, have to do whatever. And for me, it's not on a daily basis, but we have a lot of opportunities to sort of slow down and absorb this. We have daily prayers. We have Shabbat, which is, a time to reflect and rest and restore. And we have Yom Kippur, which is the ultimate. So even if we don't get what we need sort of on a daily basis from prayer, we do have a lot of opportunities on a very regular basis.
Amen. Right. And by the way, Penny, I think nobody could do this acutely and astutely and intently every day, right? Because just as you mentioned, everybody's got places to go and people to see and things to do. So who can be at that level of intentional, reflective practitioner all the time? But what I want to say is that the prayer puts that in your ecosystem, a chance to reflect more deeply in ways that you can absorb it. Dixie.
Now,
The screens have been blank when we're talking about our individual daily prayer life. I'm wondering about yours. Do you have an individual daily prayer life that has sustained you over your life?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I don't think I would have survived into adulthood without a prayer life. Because at different points in my life, I was so distraught. I was so distraught and so low that I don't think I could have survived without a prayer life. I was 20 years old when my dad died, and my dad was my best friend. He was the first death of somebody close to me. I was a junior in college. He died on December 14th, 1981. And the idea of I was a junior in college, I was going back to exams without my dad. I was going back to harsh New England winter back in the days in 1981 when it was actually cold in December and January. And I did not know how I was ever going to survive losing my father. And prayer and Kaddish and minyan, and I was going to the daily minyan every morning at 7 a.m. and at a minyan every afternoon. And I was 20 years old, as vulnerable could be. And that whole experience gave me life and strength. And then 4 years ago, when I lost my mother, I did not think I could survive that. I mean, my mom was my total hero. And my mom was my total hero. My mom was my role model. And I kind of had made a crazy bargain with God that since I lost my dad when I was 20, my mom was never going to die. And then when she died, I was just absolutely, bereft. For years, Shira was worried that I would not survive losing my mother. Shira and I have been together for 37 years. And she always worried that I would not survive losing my mother. And again, saying Kaddish every day helped me that. And then with this pandemic is just so bleak. And what's happening to our country is just so bleak. And the negative energy in our world is just so bleak. I can't listen to NPR anymore. I can't listen to the news anymore. I can't read a paper anymore. It's just so bleak. The one place where I can find solace and strength is in the Siddur. Is imagining a world that's different. So I would say, Dixie, I feel this very deeply. Anybody else want to share? Here's what I would say to you. Let me put it to you this way, and this is a real question. It's not a rhetorical question. We humans are wired to need hope. We just need hope. We need a legitimate source of hope and strength. So here's my question. If you, given all the stuff that happens in life, you know, loss and illness and toxic politics and horrible news and pandemic, okay, where do you get your hope and strength? Where do you get it from? And I think it's a really important question. Where do you get your hope and strength from? And I think the religious tradition, not just Judaism, other religions too, but Judaism is ours. You know, sacred words of prayer, sacred aspirations. I just think is a very hopeful source, is a very important source of hope and strength. And you know, and yeah, so I wanted to end the Lincoln class by saying, you know, none of us is Lincoln, but all of us will find ourselves in dark spaces. That just goes with being a human being. None of us is Lincoln, but all of us will find ourselves in dark spaces. And the question I want to leave you with is, when you are in a dark space, how do you get out? That's the question. When you're in a dark space, how do you get out? And what's going to be your lifeline? And the lifeline that I know, and the lifeline that works for me, to Dixie's question, is Jewish learning and Jewish prayer and Jewish community, is this.
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted, Linda.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I can't tell. I'm on a little mini iPad now. What works for me is family. And when my husband was alive, of course, that was, maybe not of course, but that was the main thing. And it was very, very hard after he died. And I would say my younger grandson, who's a Gutta Neshama,
is this
in
Eli?
Capital letters, grandson.
Grandson, yeah.
And the ironic thing, although it's not the same, his older brother, who went off to college 3 years before him, they were very close, was the same year that Bob died. And although the losses were different, he's very, very perceptive. And when he would call and say, "How are you, Grandma?" it was like, really, how are you? And we had a lot of good conversations. And, you know, I would say that was probably what worked best for me.
Grandchildren.
My husband when he was alive, and then Eli.
Eli. Thank you, Linda. Anyone else? So I want to close with just with an observation and a prayer. I am drawn to this darkness stuff because I just feel it's a very dark time. Whatever your politics, this is just a very dark time. Living through a period as divisive as this one, not to mention the illness and the pandemic, etc., is just very dark. And I was up, and when you're in a dark place, you need uplift. Because, you know, you don't want to end up in the darkness. You want to end up out of the darkness. So I found uplift in Lincoln. By the way, if you want to read ahead to the story, you know what I was just obsessed with this week was the Gettysburg Address. And so if you want to be uplifted, read the Gettysburg Address. Because this Lincoln, who is himself so sick and so depressed and so dark he can't get out of bed, ends up, the Gettysburg Address is as sacred as any psalm. The Gettysburg Address is as holy as any writ that we have in our tradition. And he takes the incredible death and destruction of the Civil War, and he frames it in such a way to give all of us, and to this very day, an important charge going forward. The Gettysburg Address is just an incredibly holy prophecy, really. And I think it behooves us to figure out how to get ourselves out of this darkness. And we have, we have Lincoln as a role model, and we have role models in the Torah, and we have words in the Siddur, and we have each other. So as we say, chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek, let us be strong, let us be strong, and let us strengthen one another. So thank you so much, guys. By the way, at noon, I don't know if you've been doing this, but if you haven't, you might want to try it. There's a little lunch and learn that comes from Hartman every day. These Hartman lectures have been just outstanding. They're short, they're 20 minutes. Today, it's going to be at noon. Michal Biton, who's a fabulous scholar, and it's some aspect of Judaism, citizenship, and democracy. And then it's about 20 minutes, and then we unpack it together, on a Zoom call for Temple Manual for another 10, 12 minutes. And it's just another source of uplift in this time. So if you're around at noon, just tune in to I sent an email yesterday, and just log on and take in that lecture as well. And I will see you guys next Tuesday at 9:30. We're going to be reading Theodore Roosevelt next week, and I will bring Jewish texts that try to complement the Theodore Roosevelt chapter. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,